So we've actually covered quite a bit of material in terms of getting content into an HTML document and how to properly structure that HTML document. Of course, you're probably a little bit anxious to start talking about how we can change the visual presentation of the page, how we can position content and make the content appear the way that we want it to appear. Well, it all starts with understanding the box model. The box model has 5 main properties: width, height, padding, border, and margin. Width and height are probably somewhat self-explanatory, where padding and margin and border probably make sense but probably need some further clarification. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's clarify these properties. What we're looking at here in this diagram is an HTML element, and that element is represented by this content area. So this could be anything. It could be a paragraph element, it could be an image element, a div element, whatever the case may be. This is your HTML tag. Now, that piece of HTML can have a width and height property assigned to it. It can also have a padding value assigned to it, a border value, and a margin. So let's talk about what each of these properties represent. First of all, we have the width and the height, which makes, sense for the most part. If you have a piece of content that's 100 pixels wide and 100 pixels tall, it's 100 by 100 pixels. Then we have some padding that we can add, and the padding is the distance between the content area and the border. The border is just that. It's a physical border that you see around this element. So let's say we add 5 pixels of padding and 5 pixels of border. Remember, if the width and height is 100 by 100 pixels, you have to understand how you calculate the overall width and height of an element. If you add 5 pixels of padding and a 5 pixel border, you're ultimately changing the overall width and height of this HTML element. So using that example, we have 5 pixels of border on the left, 5 pixels of padding on the left, 5 pixels of padding on the right, and 5 pixels of border on the right. So we have 10 pixels collectively over here on the left and 10 pixels collectively over here on the right. Add them together, you get 20 pixels. That 20 pixels is added to the width value of the content area. So if this was 100 pixels, it's now 120 pixels. And that's really important to understand as you try to place different elements throughout your page. You need to know exactly how much space a piece of content will take up. So again, when you're factoring in the overall width and the height, you have to calculate the padding and the border on top of the actual width property of the content area. Now you'll notice that I'm excluding margin, and that's because margin isn't factored into the overall width and height. However, margin does play a critical role. Let's say we have 2 pieces of content, and there's margin between those pieces of content. Margin does nothing more than space out the content. That margin value has to be calculated when you're trying to determine how much space you need to accommodate your HTML elements. But the key takeaway here is that when you're calculating the width and the height of an element, not only do you need to take the width and height values for the content area, you also have to calculate the values assigned to the border property and the padding property. Now this may seem somewhat confusing, so what we're going to do is take a look at how we can use the box model properties inside of Dreamweaver.